morning, everybody. Did everybody have a good evening last night and some proper sleep? So, as looking at the problem, the first thing, of course, is what Andreas has presented, which is to analyze the exposures. Then we decided to look at how can we protect those exposures. So the first thing to do is to look at what others do. So we looked at other countries in the world. There's an English saying that there's many ways to skin a cat. Well, in fact, it turns out there's many different ways to protect against a cat as well. So, different countries have different exposures. As you can see, for instance, in France, it's more of a windstorm, hailstorm type exposure. In Japan, it's earthquake. In Spain, again, more hailstorm. But in Greece, it is the most seismically active country in Europe. So certainly it's worth considering setting up some sort of national scheme. 100 years ago, there were no national catastrophe schemes. It started in Switzerland. Let me get my... And that was in the 1930s. In fact, it was 1939 that the Swiss Elemental Pool was established. The type and extent of government involvement in schemes is a reflection of the fundamental political principles, and these may vary over time and from country to country. So we can learn lessons from existing schemes, and this will prove helpful as a guideline for countries yet to begin to address disaster mitigation. And increasingly, governments are looking to privatize risk. So, the countries we looked at, the USA, California, the Caribbean, France, Iceland, Norway, Switzerland, Spain, Romania, Turkey, Japan, Taiwan, and New Zealand. Looking at these, actually all the schemes are quite complex when you get into the detail. So without going into too much complexity, we tried to find a high-level comparison criteria to give you a view of how these work. So we decided to pick a few of what we believe to be the key criteria. So when was the scheme established? Is it a primary scheme or is it a reinsurance scheme? What perils are covered? How are the rates fixed? Do they buy reinsurance? Is there government funding? Is there a fund allowed to be built up behind the scheme? And what is the primary coverage? Also, is there state guarantee? And is it compulsory upon policyholders? And is it compulsory upon insurers, or both? So, looking at Iceland, the Icelandic scheme is the Iceland Catastrophe Fund. It was established in 1975. It's a primary insurance scheme, and it covers all natural perils, excluding windstorm, has fixed rates, does buy excess of loss reinsurance, there is no government funding, there is a fund allowed to be built up over time, and it covers residential property. And we have a grid here, which is quite interesting. You'll see as we go through how the schemes differ. The Icelandic scheme there is no state guarantee, and it's compulsory just on consumers. So, France. Looking at the grid, you'll see that that's actually in the opposite corner to Iceland. They've taken quite a different view. So it's actually a voluntary participation on insurers and consumers. I would say that that's a little misleading. If actually you buy an insurance policy in France, a property policy, it must include nat cat, but it is voluntary to buy the policy in the first place. But it does have unlimited state guarantee. This was established in 1982. It's a reinsurance scheme, so the government reinsures the local market. It covers all perils apart from windstorm in metropolitan areas. The pricing is a fixed percentage of the original premiums. There's no reinsurance protection. The state actually guarantee the state reinsurer, which is CCR, that gives the protection for the local insurers. There's no build-up of funds. And it protects residential, commercial, and industrial. The next one we looked at was Spain. So, looking at the grid again, this time where it's compulsory on insurers to offer, but it's not compulsory for consumers to buy. The consortia was established in 1954. Actually, I think it came out of, there was a war damage scheme, and which started earlier, and it was formed out of that. It's a primary insurance scheme, covers all perils, has fixed rates, no reinsurance protection, no government funding, no fund build-up, but it covers residential, commercial, and industrial property. Sorry if this gets a bit repetitive, but it's the only way to actually look at these like for like. So in California, following the Northridge earthquake, they decided that it was a good idea to set something up. So this was established in 1996. Here, it's, as you'd expect in the United States, it's purely voluntary, both on insurers and consumers. It's a primary insurance scheme, covers residential earthquake. There are tariff rates based upon age and location and construction. There is reinsurance protection. There's excessive loss protection, and there's a cat bond reinsurance in the financial markets. There's no government funding. The fund does build up over time, and it covers residential property. Switzerland, the initiator of national cat schemes, established in 1939. So again, this is voluntary participation for insurers and consumers. It's a primary insurance scheme. It covers defined elemental perils with fixed rates. There is a stop-loss reinsurance of the scheme. There's no government funding. The fund does not build up over time. So it doesn't produce reserves year on year. And it covers residential, commercial, and industrial property. So you can see there's getting quite some variance between countries as the best way to skin the cat. In Japan, the JER was established in 1966. And on the grid, they're right in the middle here. It's, sorry, I haven't gone forward. Japan, there we are. There's a limited state guarantee, and it's compulsory on insurers to offer the coverage, but not compulsory to purchase. It's a reinsurance scheme. It covers residential earthquake. There's a tariff based upon age, location, and construction. There is reinsurance, which is obviously a retrocession of the reinsurance provider, as it's a reinsurance scheme. and the government is in actual fact the major reinsurer of the JER. But there's no government funding, there's no fund build-up. This covers just residential property. In Taiwan, which is a relatively recent scheme, established in 2002, I guess they probably looked at the Japanese scheme and decided to, again, have a limited state guarantee and with compulsory on insurers. But they went for a primary insurance scheme. Again, residential earthquake is the coverage. There's a flat premium per policy here. There is excessive loss reinsurance with also some structured reinsurance as well. There is government funding, and the fund does build up reserves over time. In Norway, the natural pool there, it fits on the grid. There's no state guarantee. It's compulsory on insurers this time to offer the coverage. It's a reinsurance scheme, covers all natural perils. There's a fixed rate on some insured. They buy excessive loss reinsurance. There's no government funding. There is a build-up of reserve over time. And it covers residential, commercial, industrial, and some other property, including some onshore marine classes. Turkey. The Turkish scheme, the TCIP, was set up in 2000 following the earthquake in 1999 with the assistance of the World Bank. You'll see on the grid that there's 2 dots because actually this is compulsory on consumers to purchase and also on insurers to offer the coverage. It's a primary insurance scheme, but reinsured, the primary insurers of the distribution channel, and they're reinsured into the pool. So they use the insurance companies as the distribution channel. It covers residential earthquake. There's fixed tariff rates, varying by region and construction. There's excessive loss and some structured reinsurance to protect it. There's no government funding. The fund does build up reserves over time, and it covers residential property. In Romania, I think probably because this was also with assistance of the World Bank, you'll see they fit into the grid in a similar way to Turkey. So there's compulsory insurance on consumers and on insurers to offer. This is primary insurance, again reinsured to the pool, much like the Turkish program. It covers residential earthquake, flood and landslide. There's a fixed flat premiums over 2 dwelling types. They purchase excessive loss reinsurance. There's no government funding. There is a fund reserve allowed to build up and covers residential property. In New Zealand, the Earthquake Commission was set up in 1944. It's compulsory on insurers to offer coverage to consumers. It's a primary insurance scheme covering earthquake, volcano, and tsunami. There's a fixed rate with a cap. They buy excessive loss reinsurance. There's no funding, but it is actually owned by the state. But it should be self-funding with the premiums. They should be adequate premiums. There is a build-up of reserves over time and covers residential property. Now this is a very interesting one, the Caribbean, covering 16, in fact it's now, I just looked yesterday, it's 17 countries. San Martin just joined this. So it was established in 2007. The insureds are actually the individual island governments. And so they will buy an amount of coverage based on a parametric trigger, which then gives them the funds to assist their citizens in the event of hurricane. So the insureds are the governments of the pool members. There's earthquake, wind, and excess rainfall. It's a complicated way the rates are set up, but it's based on an average annualized loss multiplied by a formula. I won't get into it. It's quite complicated. It's parametric, so it's reinsured into the international reinsurance market with parametric triggers. So it has to be a windstorm of a certain speed to trigger recovery. And there's some structured reinsurance behind as well. And they receive funding actually from the EU, Canada, and the USA, which quite surprised me actually. There's no fund build-up, and it just, as it say, covers government exposure. So there are other schemes. There's the UK Flood Re, there's the United States National Flood Program, the Florida Hurricane Catastrophe Program, the Algerian CAT Program, the Indonesian Program. But I thought actually we don't want to bore you by going through the same process with each one of those. But I hope what I've shown gives you a flavour that there's many, many ways to approach setting up a national catastrophe pool. So conclusion, there's no such thing as a best catastrophe insurance program, given that the alternatives are based on existing conditions and intended objectives. But cover should be affordable, relevant, and available. But I believe national catastrophe schemes do represent a win-win situation for all. Thank you.